now, Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves, we've been talking about this all morning, will be pledging a decade of national renewal if Labour wins the general election. In a speech this evening, she's going to compare their challenges to those faced by Margaret Thatcher in 1979. She's promising a new chapter in Britain's economic history. We've been asking your thoughts on all of this as well. First, though, let's get the thoughts of a former advisor to Gordon Brown, who's just come up in conversation, and a political economy professor, Michael Jacobs. Good afternoon to you, Michael.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. Tom Slater also still with us, still in the studio. Get his thoughts in just a moment. This big speech, this is quite a sort of a significant event for sort of, I suppose, policy wonks who know about these things, the annual Mayor's Lecture in the City of London. Rachel Reeves is going to say that she vows that a Labour government will work with business to create a decade of national renewal, and she's likening the economic challenge awaiting the next government to that faced by Margaret Thatcher. Very different from when Labour got into power, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, in 1997, when the economy was in great shakes. It looks more like 79 than 97 this year, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And we are clearly in a very difficult economic situation. And the inheritance of whoever wins the next election, obviously looks like it's going to be Labour, will be pretty dire, which is not a good commentary on the last 15 years of Conservative governments. 1979 is a very good comparison year, in fact, because not only did Margaret Thatcher rule for the next 10 years, but the kind of economic policy she brought in was very different from the one that had previously been practiced during the 1970s. And there was a major change in 1979 in the way in which economies were governed in the UK, but also in the US and elsewhere. And I think it's very clever of Rachel Reeves to say, look, we're now facing another moment like that, not only because of the depth of the crisis, but because we need a very different approach to ruling the economy in the next decade from the previous one.
But what is Labour going to be able to do differently? As we've been discussing on the show, every single thing in the in tray of Rishi Sunak right now will be exactly the same sort of stuff that is in the in tray of any other Tory leader if he was deposed before the next election, and Sir Keir Starmer if he wins the next election, most likely now to be in the autumn. It's exactly the same issue. You've got the same level of national debt, the same number of people who are on NHS waiting list, same number of people who are not working but of working age paying tax. You've got the same tax levels, people angry about that. You've got, OK, cost of living might improve, but, it's not like, people talk about inflation coming down. It's not like, oh, well, we're going to go back to the prices we had 2 years ago. No, we're not. They're going to stay high and they're just going to carry on going up, but at a lower rate. People are still going to feel poorer. You've got the immigration issues. You've still got Ukraine. You've possibly got future issues internationally with China and goodness knows what else. You've got energy prices, the net zero. I mean, it's all the same stuff. Housing crisis, you name it. It's all the same stuff. So what is Labour going to do differently with the economy that will, A, lead to growth, be nice to have some of that at some point, and B, get enough money in to, I suppose, spend on anything else?
Well, I'm not sure what your point is. Of course, the in-tray is exactly the same for whoever takes government, takes office after a general election. But the point is what's in the out-tray. What will a Labour government do differently? And we have some idea of that. I think not everything. So firstly, they will adopt an industrial strategy. So rather than just leaving private sector companies to decide where and how to invest, they will encourage investment in key industries and in key parts of the country. There was a moment when it looked like Boris Johnson might be interested in doing that, but he abandoned the levelling up agenda and the industrial strategy agenda. So there's a very different approach to the role of government in encouraging investment in the sectors and parts of the country we need, the kind of thing that is generally practiced
But since when do civil servants or politicians know better than individuals running private companies where best to invest and what to invest in? I mean, I'm not sure the government's got a good track record on that.
No, they don't know better. What they can do is that they can provide them with the assistance and with, in some cases, the money to help push them into parts of the economy, the sectors and the regions that they're not otherwise doing. This is what's happening in the rest of Europe. It's what's happening in the United States. The United States has now got record growth levels because of the encouragement of government into particularly the green sectors. And
no. America has got record growth levels.
Wants to do something similar.
America has got record growth levels because they're now the world's biggest fossil fuel producers. They've invested in fossil fuels and have now got cheaper energy and a better benefiting from those higher energy costs.
No, this is really not the case.
Because of
Julia,
an American-first policy of investment in American manufacturers.
Look at the evidence on where American energy is coming from. Yes, they have fossil fuels, but they have also invested hugely in renewables. And because they're not dependent
only in American companies.
Because they're not dependent on Russian supplies and Middle Eastern supplies of oil, they don't suffer this enormous volatility and the huge increases in energy prices.
Because they frack, which Labour's opposed to. Because they frack.
The problem that we have in the UK is we are dependent on overseas fossil fuels. The ones that we produce in the North Sea don't come back into the British economy, they're exported. So those overseas fossil fuels give us these very volatile and over recent years, much higher energy prices. So the shift to renewables, which is of course what the Conservative government has done, as well as the Labour government promises to do, is a way of reducing energy prices and energy security.
Oil exploration and fracking is why America is doing well. If you have high energy costs, you have a more expensive economy and people can't afford to invest.
But the key thing about
renewables aren't going to do it.
Policy, Julia, the key thing about economic policy in America is they are directing private sector finance into the green industries. That's what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing. And really billions of dollars are now being invested in those areas. So that's what Labour wants to do. It won't be on the same scale, but it wants to help private business move into those sectors that will be successful globally and that will provide jobs in different...
Well, I have to say, that's not holding out much hope.
And that's a major different... That's a way of approaching economic policy, which is different from the last 40 years.
But again, where are they getting the money from that?
That is what will generate the growth.
The £28 billion Green Fund is kind of being sort of shoved into the corner and disappeared. Then it's become, well, £28 billion a year, but by the end of Parliament, that's, that money ain't there anymore. You know as well as I do that the last budget, the absolute sort of where is the rabbit from the hat budget from Jeremy Hunt, actually took away an awful lot of the funding. Basically, that money's already been spent and accounted for by the Tories in terms of national insurance cuts and other things. Rachel Reeves, as the Shadow Chancellor, is going to have to kind of get back to the drawing board to come up with more of that. In terms of that investment, OK, if that worked, great. I kind of think that government should get out of the way of private companies. I think that's
what they have been doing for 15 years. We've had I
don't think there's any private companies that feel that way about that, Michael.
Your policy, Julia, might have worked, but it hasn't worked, and so something else is needed.
OK, we're going to try something else that won't work. Brilliant, we're using taxpayers' money. Here's the thing.
It's working in other countries, so the evidence suggests that it will work.
Well, if you're going to talk about growth levels in many European countries, I think big question marks there as well, Michael. Let's talk about how you would deal with things like, sluggish growth. You're saying, OK, we're going to invest in some of these industries, but the growth levels in this country have been sluggish for decades. Productivity, sluggish for decades.
What gives you better productivity, Julia? What gives you better productivity is investment. And we have very low investment. Let me finish.
Why have governments not done that? No, you interrupted me. I was trying to get to a question.
But you're meant to be asking me questions.
No, I didn't get to the question because you interrupted me.
No, but you raise an important point, productivity. The point, Julia, is why have a person on unless you let them speak?
You
can speak for the whole of your programme. And you can interview somebody who's
you can carry on moaning or you can make your point. Sorry, this is embarrassing. You're a grown man. Do grow up, Michael. You've talked for plenty of time. I was getting to a point about what else you're going to do. Or if you just want to whinge for the next few minutes about not getting enough time, then carry on, but you're only wasting your own time. Who's going to not talk? Should we end it there?
Might go now?
If you want to.
You raised the important point about productivity. How do you get better productivity? You get better productivity through investment. The UK has one of the lowest rates of business investment and pretty much the lowest rate of public investment of any major industrialised country. So one of the things Labour will do is it will put money in through public investment, and that should encourage private investment. And that's how you get productivity up, and that's how you will get growth up. And the reason we've not seen that growth over the last 15 years under Conservative governments is because investment has been so low.
OK, but you know why investment has been so low in the private sector, Michael. It's because no one needed to invest because we had lots and lots of abundant, cheap labour, because we imported people from abroad. That is still a Labour policy. Extraordinarily, it's still a Tory policy. You ain't going to persuade companies to invest in technology when they can employ half of Eastern Europe to come in.
So you're completely right. But you then need to say, well, how do we make that more difficult? And the way how do we make that flexible labour market a bit more difficult? Labour has said we're going to increase the rights to working people. So, for example, banning 0 hours contracts, enabling workers to have rights from day one.
Even
now,
though
what that will do,
no one will employ anybody.
It will raise wages and conditions at the bottom, and that will encourage not only higher incomes, obviously, but also investment in the machinery and equipment, which will actually give us productivity growth.
Even the Labour Party wasn't paying minimum wage to their own staff. They're still employing unpaid interns, for goodness sake. Okay, just finally, given the state of the economy, given the dire states we're in, with the best will in the world, no government, whichever is elected, with these sort of half-hearted ideas are going to make a massive, big change. We're going to be seeing lots of culture wars. That's where this is going to turn into. That's going to end up being the big dividing line between the Conservatives and Labour, isn't it?
Well, only if the Conservatives make it so. And if they
don't say anything.
If the Conservatives really think that what really matters to the British public are culture war issues, then I don't think they've understood the British public. What the British public want to know is, when is our NHS going to be better? When is our economy going to start growing? When are we going to get jobs and high streets improved and so on in the towns and cities around the country? Those are the things that matter to the British public. And it isn't Labour who pursues culture wars. It is always people on the right of politics in the Conservative Party and programmes like your own, which have pursued issues.
Well, talking about women facing criminal records, Michael, for saying that a trans-identified man is a man, and you're saying that it's people like me and the right who are bringing up the culture wars.
Ask the public how many people think that's an important issue facing the country. It's tiny.
They may not think it's as important as the economy and housing and immigration, but they absolutely do think it's important.
And so Labour has a plan for housing. It is going to relax the planning rules and build more houses. So that's a real issue.
Okay.
That's one real issue facing millions of people around the country. But the culture war issues just aren't. Okay. And that's why, if you want a proper debate about this election, which really meets the needs of the people,
I've got to move on.
Then let's focus on those issues that really affect the people.
Michael, thank you for joining us. I hope you felt you had plenty of time to speak. Michael Jacobs, former advisor. In the end, go back and watch the video. You'll be perfectly happy. You had plenty of time to talk, Michael. Thank you for joining us.